In April of 1906, the city of San Francisco kept its birth records in a building on McAllister Street. The Hall of Records. Brick walls, stone foundation, steel vault doors, designed to survive exactly the kind of disaster that arrived at 5:12 in the morning on April 18th. The earthquake did not destroy that building. The fire did. 3 days of fire, moving block by block through a city that had lost its water mains in the first 60 seconds of shaking. And when the flames finally died and the smoke lifted over the ruins, the birth records of an estimated 300,000 people were ash. That number deserves a moment. 300,000. Not damaged, not partially recovered. Gone, every certificate, every registration, every official proof that a human being had been born in San Francisco, entered the world, drawn breath, been named, and been counted erased in a fire that the building's vault was specifically engineered to prevent. The vault failed. The backup copies, which should have existed in Sacramento, were incomplete and in some cases missing entirely. And the index books, the reference guides that would have allowed reconstruction of lost records, burned in the same fire, in the same building, in the same 72 hours. A city of 400,000 people woke up on April 21st with no official proof that most of them had ever been born. And what happened next shaped immigration law, family inheritance, citizenship claims, and identity fraud for the next century. It is still shaping them now. Because the wall those families hit in 1906 is the same wall their great-grandchildren hit today. Same office, same answer, same silence where a document should be. The standard telling of this story treats the destruction of San Francisco's birth records as a tragic footnote to a natural disaster. Earthquake, fire, loss, rebuilding, the records burned, and that was that. But when you examine the specific sequence of events surrounding the records, not the earthquake, not the fire in general, but the records, specifically, a pattern emerges that the footnote version does not accommodate. The Hall of Records on McAllister Street was not some afterthought structure. It was purpose-built to house the most important civic documents in one of the wealthiest cities in the Western Hemisphere. San Francisco in 1906 was the financial capital of the Pacific Coast. Its port handled more cargo than any other west of the Mississippi. Its population had grown by over 300% in the previous 50 years, driven by successive waves of immigration Chinese laborers, Irish families, Italian merchants, Japanese workers, and thousands of others whose legal presence in the country depended entirely on the documents stored in that building. The vault inside the Hall of Records was a Herring Hall Marvin safe room. These were the industry standard for fireproof document storage. The company's own specifications guaranteed survival in fires reaching temperatures of 1700 degrees Fahrenheit for up to 4 hours. The San Francisco fire burned in some areas for over 70 hours. But the vault did not simply fail because the fire was hotter or longer than expected. Reports from engineers who examined the ruins noted that the vault doors had been opened during the fire, not breached. Opened, the working theory at the time was that city officials or firefighters had attempted to retrieve documents before the flames reached the building and had been unable to reseal the vault before evacuating. But the specific officials who made that decision were never publicly identified. No formal inquiry into the vault's failure was conducted. The assumption administrative chaos during an unprecedented disaster became the accepted explanation, and the question of who opened the vault, when, and why, was never formally answered. What was answered, almost immediately, was who would suffer most from the loss. Within weeks of the fire, the federal government began receiving applications for duplicate citizenship documentation from Chinese residents of San Francisco. Under the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Chinese immigrants faced the most restrictive entry requirements of any group in the country. Their legal right to remain depended on specific documents, residency certificates, business permits, birth registrations for American-born children that were now gone. And the federal government's response was not sympathetic reconstruction. It was suspicion. Here is what you need to understand to see why the timeline matters. The Chinese Exclusion Act had been renewed in 1904, just 2 years before the earthquake. Enforcement had been tightening. The Bureau of Immigration had been expanding its staff in San Francisco, specifically to process deportation cases. And the single largest obstacle to those deportations was the existence of birth records, proving that certain individuals of Chinese descent had been born on American soil and were therefore citizens by right. When those records burned, the obstacle burned with them. Now, that does not mean the fire was set to destroy those records. The fire's cause is well-documented ruptured gas lines, collapsed chimneys, and a series of ill-conceived dynamite demolitions by the army that spread the blaze rather than containing it. The earthquake was real, the fire was real, the destruction was indiscriminate. But the institutional response to the destruction was not indiscriminate. It was highly specific. Within 6 months of the fire, the Bureau of Immigration established a dedicated interrogation process for Chinese residents attempting to reconstruct their legal identity. These interrogations, conducted at the Pacific Mail Steamship Company dock and later at Angel Island, were not brief formalities. They lasted hours, sometimes days. Applicants were asked to describe the interior layout of homes they had lived in decades earlier. They were asked the names of neighbours on streets that no longer existed. They were asked to provide witnesses who could confirm their birth witnesses who were themselves undocumented because the same fire had destroyed their records too. The denial rate was extraordinary. Between 1906 and 1920, over 70% of Chinese applicants for reconstructed birth documentation were denied on first application. Many were denied permanently. Families that had lived in San Francisco for 2 and 3 generations found themselves legally erased. American-born citizens were reclassified as aliens. Children were separated from parents who could not prove the relationship, and the appeals process required documentation that by definition no longer existed. Compare this to the experience of European-descended residents. The same fire destroyed the same records for everyone. But when a white resident of San Francisco applied for a reconstructed birth certificate through the county clerk's office after 1906, the process was an affidavit system. 2 witnesses of good standing would sign a statement confirming the applicant's birth. The affidavit was accepted, the certificate was issued. No multi-day interrogation. No demand to diagram the floor plan of a childhood home from memory. No 70% denial rate. 2 systems. Same fire, same lost records. Different experience at the counter. That is not a footnote. That is a policy decision made by identifiable officials in a specific historical moment. And the effects of that decision did not end in 1920. The affidavit system, ironically, created its own crisis. Because it required only 2 witnesses and a signature, it became the single largest mechanism for immigration fraud in early 20th century American history. The so-called paper son phenomenon, in which Chinese immigrants claimed to be the American-born children of men who used the affidavit system to create false birth records, was a direct, documented, and entirely predictable consequence of the 2-tiered reconstruction process. Men who were actual citizens or who had successfully navigated the affidavit process would report additional children born before the earthquake. Because the birth records were gone, there was no way to verify or disprove the claim. A slot was created, a name was created, and that slot, that paper identity, could be sold to a new immigrant in China who would memorize the family details, travel to San Francisco, and claim to be the son who had never existed. Estimates vary, but historians at the National Archives have suggested that between 10,000 and 50,000 Chinese immigrants entered the United States between 1906 and 1940 using paper identities made possible by the destruction of San Francisco's birth records. An entire shadow genealogy, built on ash. Families today who trace their ancestry through San Francisco in this period often discover that the names on their earliest American documents belong to someone else, or to no one at all. Their actual family history begins at a point of deliberate fiction. A fiction that was necessary because the legitimate path had been designed to fail. And this is where the two patterns converge. The destruction of the records was an accident of geology and fire, but the reconstruction of identity afterward was a system of choices. Who was believed? Who was interrogated? Who was offered a simple affidavit? And who was offered a locked door? Those choices were not made by earthquakes. They were made in offices, by officials, under policies that already existed before the ground shook. The earthquake did not create the inequality. It revealed the machinery that was already in place and gave it a new, devastating tool: the absence of paper. Think about what that means for a family. Your grandfather was born in San Francisco in 1898. He lived there for 8 years. He walked to school on streets that are still on the map today. He was an American citizen from his first breath. And then the fire came, and the paper that proved it was gone. And when he went to the government to ask for a new copy, he was told to prove he existed. Not with a signature, not with a neighbour's word, with hours of interrogation designed to find inconsistencies, designed by its own internal logic to deny. His children grew up knowing that their father's citizenship was conditional in a way their white neighbour's citizenship was not. His grandchildren inherited that knowledge, and in many cases inherited the silence that came with it. Because the paper son system meant that talking about your family's real immigration history was dangerous. If your grandfather had entered as a paper son, his real name was a secret. His real village was a secret. His real family connections were severed by necessity and maintained only in private. Entire communities built their American lives on a foundation of enforced silence, and that silence calcified into a kind of generational amnesia. People stopped asking because asking was unsafe. And by the time the legal danger past the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943, the Paper Son Confession Program ran from 1956 to 1966. Many of the people who knew the real stories were already gone. The institutional handling of the lost records didn't stop with immigration. It extended into property law, inheritance, and civic participation in ways that are still being untangled. When San Francisco's assessor's office attempted to reconstruct property ownership records after the fire, the process relied heavily on existing tax receipts, bank documents, and testimony from established business leaders. Residents who had owned property informally through verbal agreements, community arrangements, or systems that did not generate English-language paper trails found their claims subordinated to those who could produce a bank record or a business partner's affidavit. In the south of Market District, where working-class immigrant families had lived in dense residential blocks for decades, property that had been occupied by Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino families was reassigned during Reconstruction. The official record shows transfers and sales. What the official record does not show is how many of those transfers were voluntary. The paper was gone, the leverage was gone with it, and there is a layer beneath even that. The fire destroyed not only government-held records, but also the archives of community organizations, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, known as the Six Companies, lost membership rolls, correspondence, and internal dispute resolution records that had served as a parallel legal system for decades. Temple records, family association genealogies, merchant guild contracts. These were not government documents, and their loss has never been quantified in any official assessment of the fire's damage. But for the communities that depended on them, they were more important than any county clerk's filing. They were the proof of relationships, obligations, and belonging that the American legal system had never bothered to record in the first place. When they burned, the community lost not just history, but infrastructure. The mechanisms by which disputes were settled, reputations were maintained, and mutual aid was organised, all of it had to be rebuilt from memory. And memory, under pressure, simplifies, details drop away. Connections are lost. Within a generation, the complexity of pre-earthquake Chinese San Francisco was flattened into a simpler story that fit into the space the fire had left. But the evidence that survives is remarkable in its specificity. At the National Archives facility in San Bruno, California, there are more than 300,000 files from the immigration interrogation process that followed the earthquake. Each file contains transcripts of interviews, questions asked, answers given, discrepancies noted. These files are the single most detailed record of daily life in pre-earthquake San Francisco that exists anywhere. They describe the interiors of homes that were leveled in 1906. They record the names of neighbors on streets that were never rebuilt. They preserve the floor plans of buildings that no photograph captured. The interrogators were trying to catch lies. What they created, accidentally, was an archive of astonishing granularity, a record of where people slept, what they ate, how their kitchens were arranged, and which direction their front doors faced. The very process designed to exclude became, over time, the richest preservation of what was lost. Those files are open to researchers today. Families who make the drive to San Bruno and sit in the reading room and open the brown accordion folders sometimes find their great-grandfather's voice for the first time, recorded not by a loving relative, but by an immigration inspector trying to deport him. The questions are cold. The answers are careful. And between the lines, in the details about a cast-iron stove in the back room, or a chicken kept in the alley, or the specific number of steps from the front door to the street, there is a world that was erased twice, once by fire, and once by the institutional refusal to believe the people who remembered it. You can visit the site of the Old Hall of Records today. It is a different building now, a different function, a different city, in almost every way. The streets are the same streets, with the same names, following the same grid that was laid down before the earthquake. But beneath the sidewalks, if you look at the right maps, the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps from 1905, available digitally through the Library of Congress, you can see the shapes of the buildings that burned. You can see the lot lines that were redrawn. You can see the places where a dense neighborhood became, after the fire, an empty lot, and then a public building, and then a different city's idea of itself. The families are still there too. Not all of them, but enough. In the Richmond district and the Sunset, and along Clement Street, there are families who trace their San Francisco roots to before the earthquake, but cannot prove it with paper. Their proof is in kitchen recipes and family photographs, and a specific knowledge of streets that changed their names. Their great-grandchildren apply for genealogical records and receive a form letter explaining that records prior to 1906 were destroyed. The letter is polite, it is accurate. And it is the same wall. The same wall that went up in April of 1906 when the vault doors opened and the paper caught fire and 300,000 identities became a matter of someone else's willingness to believe. Every archive has edges. Every official record has a boundary where documentation ends and human memory begins. But in San Francisco, that boundary was not drawn by time or by the natural limits of record keeping. It was drawn by fire, and then it was enforced by policy, and then it was maintained by silence. The question is not whether the records were lost. The question is what was built in the space where they should have been, and whose version of the past was allowed to fill it. The vault doors on McAllister Street have never been found.